Hey friends, happy Wednesday. I told you yesterday I was going to talk a little bit more about frost blanket and why it's used, but I wanted to retouch on raised beds. I got a lot of great feedback from a lot of people about building raised beds. I have pictures of people that have already gotten theirs done and they're planted. I have pictures from people that are halfway done and they're asking me about soil. I have gotten a lot of questions from people just about how to get started. So I wanted to touch on a couple things. I went back and thought maybe I forgot. I talked about soil and the type of stuff to put in your raised bed. Behind me here is a pile of compost. This is what we use to fertilize everything on our farm crop-wise. All of our high tunnels and our outside garden areas get compost. But this is also what I filled most of my raised bed with. I did put some branches and just junk on the bottom. That stuff's all going to break down, decompose, and add nutrients to the soil. But then this is the type of stuff that I put in it next, mixed with that peat moss, a bale of peat moss, and then also some of the raised bed soil. This compost is just, it's a mixture of crops that we pulled out. It's manure that we cleaned off of our winter feeding lot. And anytime we clean out an animal pen, it all comes up here. You can see kind of a couple different piles. Twice a year, we'll come up and we'll mix this with the loader on the tractor. Mixing it helps to break it down. It heats up on the inside and it breaks down the fiber in the plants and the manure. And so you end up with something that looks like this. It's turning back into soil. So you can get this type of stuff. You can buy a compost type thing at Lowe's, Home Depot, Tractor Supply, Family Farm and Home. They all sell bags of compost or animal manure that's like this. So you could use that in your raised bed. They will also sell bales of peat moss. I know Family Farm and Home has them. I just saw them yesterday, but I have seen peat moss at Lowe's. Home Depot has them. Menards, that all sell bales of peat moss. And then all of those places also sell the bags of garden soil, the raised bed soil. So you want a mixture of all three of those things. You really just need, for that 4 by 8 foot raised bed that I showed you yesterday, one large bale of peat moss is enough. If the bales are fairly small, like 1 cubic foot, you could do 2 bags of peat moss. And then I would do 50-50, the raised bed soil and compost. So that's kind of what you're looking for soil wise. I had some questions about what to do to prevent weeds. You could spray the bottom of your raised bed before you put your soil in it if you're putting it right on top of grass. If you chose to do that, that'll kill the grass. I try to use no chemicals really. So I don't spray. You really don't need to spray because once you pile all this stuff on top of the grass, it's just going to smother it and it's going to die naturally. So you don't necessarily need to do that. I did build some raised beds with my students at school, and we put them in an area that it grows a lot of weeds. We bought some landscape fabric and we stapled that to the very bottom of the raised bed to prevent weeds. We didn't spray, we didn't do anything chemical wise, but we put some of the landscape fabric down and it hasn't grown a single weed in it since we built them over a year ago. So that's a great way to prevent weeds if you're putting it on a grassy spot. Another thing you could do is put a layer of rock down underneath your raised bed. That helps with drainage. If you already have a rocky spot, that a graveled landscaped area, you could put your raised bed right down on top of that. You don't have to put it down on grass or dirt because you're filling it with dirt. Other questions? Fertilizer. You do need to pay more attention to the fertility in your raised bed than you would if you were planting vegetables right into the soil. So the best thing to do is buy a slow release type fertilizer of some kind. There are organic fertilizers out there, there's synthetic fertilizers, but find something that is slow release so that you're going to want to add that to your raised bed right as you plant your vegetables, and then once or twice throughout the season. But that's just going to ensure that you always have nutrients in that raised bed, because eventually as you keep growing over the course of time, the nutrients that you originally added with this manure and the peat moss and the compost and the raised bed soil, that's all going to be absorbed by your plant. So you do need to replenish nutrients a lot more often than you would if you planted into the soil. I'm going to take you down and show you areas where we are using frost blanket, because especially this year, that's been really important. And for raised beds, frost blankets are almost essential right at the moment to get your crops growing. This, again, can be found, well, Lowe's and Home Depot have everything covered in it because they have plants. I got this on sale at Family Farm and Home for $2. A lot of places are carrying this right now because of the cold. So I'm going to show you how it's used and why it's used. This is a bed that I have used frost blanket on. I do have vegetables and flowers under frost blanket right now because it has been so cold this spring. We started out in March. It looked like the weather was getting warm, and I, like many other people, rushed to plant things. And it's just simply that's time to start some of these crops. But then it got cold. It's been even snowing until this week. And a lot of crops can't tolerate it being that cold. It's also been really windy, which is hard on crops. So one thing that we can do to help our crops is to use this frost blanket. This frost blanket, basically it acts like a heater for these plants. Not that it heats anything up, but when we put this over top of our crops, we take some fence wire and we cut it and we make hoops. That's what keeps the frost blanket up off of the crops a little bit. You don't necessarily have to do that if you're growing in a very small space, but we do that because some of our crops get tall and we don't want it smothering the crop. But you can put it right down on top of the plant. But basically what this does is it traps the soil, or traps the heat coming off of the soil. Soil, when it is sunny, is much, much warmer than the air itself. We can walk out here, I'm still freezing cold on May 12th, whatever it is, but the soil temperature is a lot warmer than the air temperature that I'm feeling. So what I need to do is trap that heat down alongside my plant, and I need to keep it there. So it's not necessarily, it's not doing the greenhouse effect like these high tunnels are. That plastic is creating a high tunnel effect, or the high tunnels are creating the greenhouse effect inside there. It's taking in sunlight and it's trapping the heat. The frost blanket is keeping the heat that's radiating off of the soil, and it's keeping it around the plants to keep them from freezing. If we take a look under here, I've had to use some heavy measures to keep these from blowing, but I have a crop of campanula, which is a flower, under here. This crop, if it were outside uncovered, it would probably be dead. It can't tolerate this wind, and it also can't tolerate cold. And although I need to weed them, if you zoom in here, this plant itself, although it's short and it's not growing as fast as they normally would, it's still very healthy. It's not turning purple, it's not lacking nutrients, it's able to take in the nutrients that it needs, and it hasn't frozen. I don't have crinkled leaves that are frost damaged because I've got this frost blanket on top. I also want to show you a vegetable example of how using this frost blanket can help accelerate the growth of a vegetable and help it grow a little faster so you get your crop sooner. This crop here, this row here, is a crop of broccoli. We are standing in one of our high tunnels. So this does have plastic over it. It's way warmer in here than it is outside. But the concept is the same whether you're growing something under plastic or whether you are growing in a raised bed or just in an outside garden. This frost blanket I have had covering this entire row. Broccoli really can't tolerate being below 38 degrees without being covered. It'll freeze and you'll have a lot of damage. You're not going to get a very good crop off of that broccoli. But because I have covered my broccoli plants with a frost blanket, it will keep the air temperature and the soil underneath the frost blanket will stay about 4 to 6 degrees warmer than the air temperature outside. So when it's 28 degrees, add 6 to that, it keeps it at a temperature that broccoli can survive without having damage. So that's why we've covered it, and I'm getting a very nice crop of early broccoli. Broccoli outside wouldn't look like this, it would be frozen. I do want to point out how much of an impact frost blanket can have on a crop. To be very honest with you, this frost blanket we use year after year. I don't put new stuff out every year. I try to get as many years out of one piece as I can. So I have a couple holes in my frost blanket, and when I examine my crops, I have noticed that there are some plants that are a lot bigger than the couple plants that I've had under the hole, so it didn't really get covered very well. And if my camera woman can zoom in a little bit, these broccoli plants here have been completely covered. And even though they've been completely covered, I can even see right here, this crinkling right there, that's cold damage. It hasn't damaged the entire plant, but that leaf, you can see there, it's still, it's been cold. But these plants right here have been fully covered. The hole that I had is right here. So when I uncovered this, look how much smaller this broccoli plant is compared to its buddy right next to it that had full coverage with the frost blanket. So not only does frost blanket keep your plants warm, it'll keep them from frost damage more so than without it. It's also going to accelerate the growth of your crops. If you had crops outside in a raised bed, even if it's not going to get to a temperature that's going to damage them, sometimes it's beneficial to cover them with some frost blanket just to get some extra heat and some extra growth on your early spring plants so that you can harvest your vegetables just a little bit earlier. I hope that answered some more questions about raised beds, gave you a little bit more information. If you do have any more questions, please feel free to text me, call me, email me. I'll eventually answer you, I promise. And for my students, your question for the day is, find one crop that does not need frost blanket. There are a few crops that we grow that will freeze solid and look dead, and as soon as it warms up, I can go out and I can pick that crop. The ice, the freezing didn't damage them at all. So find one crop that can do that. Send me your answers.